All right, this is going to be my last reading of the Nightbook. We're going to finish it. I'm ready to jump back in. They've got their plan. They've got their ingredient to be able to tell what can get the smell to go away. Here we go. Chapter 16, Pair of Red Eyes. After a quick breakfast, the two children donned their goggles and entered the nursery. It was the first time that Alex had been back since the incident with the danglers, and he was amazed at all the work Yasmin had done. Shattered black lights had been replaced, overturned plants restored to their rightful position. Luminous leaves and glowing stems created a brightly lit path through the darkness. Unlike the last time he had been here, the nursery was quiet and peaceful. Why does that night seem so long ago? Alex wondered. They moved quickly. Yasmin stopped every so often to gather an ingredient she needed. At one point, she handed Alex a pair of scissors to hold. She didn't ask him to hold them, nor did she need to. Inspired by this subtle gesture of friendship, Alex decided to risk a question that had been on his mind. "So, where do you live?" Alex asked. "In the real world." "Why do you want to know?" Yasmin asked. The old caution had crept into her voice. "Sorry," Alex said, a little hurt. "I know you don't like to talk about your old life. I just thought that maybe things had changed." She touched his hand in the darkness. "It's not that I don't want to tell you, Alex," Yasmin said. "It's just, it hurts too much to talk about it. I miss my family a lot. But they're like a wound that hasn't healed. If I don't think about it, the pain is bearable. But the moment I talk about home or say their names, I remember how bad it hurts. It has nothing to do with you." "I get that," Alex said, relieved. "I just wanted to see how close we live to each other." He paused and added softly, "You know, in case we ever want to hang out or something after." "Oh," Yasmin said, "you really think we're going to get out of here?" "Unicorn Girl did it," Alex said. "Why not us?" Yasmin considered this for a long time. 33rd Street, she finally said, looking over her shoulder. Her face was tinted mauve from a nearby fern. "Just off Parsons." Alex smiled. It was too far for him to walk, but there was a bus stop right at the corner. "That'll work," he said. They took a sharp left down a narrow hallway that he hadn't noticed before. After a short walk, they came to a heavy curtain initialed identical to the one near the entrance to the nursery. Yasmin held it up and opened to him. As he entered the next room, Alex felt Lenore brush past his legs. Until that moment, he'd had no idea that she had even followed them, but he was glad. She should be here for this, he thought. She's one of us. "You can take your goggles off now," Yasmin said, letting the curtain close behind them. She removed her own goggles and reached for something behind Alex. Click. Work lights buzzed to life. They were regular lights, not black lights, and Alex squinted against the unexpected brightness. After his eyes had a chance to readjust, he saw that he was in a simple room with a concrete floor and 4 identical silver machines. "Oil distillers," Yasmin said. "You put the magic herbs inside. Steam sucks out all the good stuff and turns a few drops of essential oil. Pretty cool, right?" Each distiller was split into 2 vats with dials and tubes between them. The bottom one was fat and wide and looked like it could hold a lot of liquid. Above it was a tall cylinder on a metal stand that reminded Alex of a pipe from an old church organ. 3 of the distillers bubbled and chugged and occasionally released puffs of copper-hued smoke into the air. Alex stepped closer to one of them and held his hand a few inches shy of its surface. Waves of heat tingled his skin. "Don't touch it," Yasmin exclaimed. "You'll get a nasty burn." Alex pulled his hand back. "What's this one making right now?" he asked. Yasmin consulted a notebook hanging off a small stepladder. "Popularity oil." She pointed to the other 2 machines in turn. "Hair-growing oil, acne oil. To give someone acne or take it away?" "Beats me," Yasmin said. "I just follow the recipe." She crossed the room to a wooden workbench. Long trays held beakers of all shapes and sizes. There were also several knives crusted with old plant matter. "How long will it take?" Alex asked, bending down to feed Lenore a handful of Fruit Loops. She gobbled them up quickly and then nudged his pocket with her head, wanting more. Alex obliged. My cats do that too. If they know that I have cat treats in my hand or anything that they like to eat, they'll just kind of headbutt me to show that they want it. That's kind of fun. "We can't do anything yet," Yasmin said, hanging the herbs from hooks above the workbench. "We have to let these dry overnight." She switched on the small heating unit beneath the herbs. Warm air blew upward. "In the morning I can set them up in the distiller." Figure 6 hours in the machine. We should be ready to go by tomorrow night. Assuming I could think of a story, Alex said. Only 2 left. After tonight, I'm all out. Why bother writing anything new? Yasmin asked, washing her hands in a slop sink. Natasha is going to drink the sleeping oil during dinner. She'll be asleep before you have to read anything. We don't know if it's going to work right away, Alex said. The original recipe was for a potion. We're changing it to an oil. What if it takes a little while to kick in? We want everything to seem as normal as possible while we wait. A single drop of oil is super concentrated, Yasmin said, bending down to check a temperature gauge outside one of the distillers. My guess is it will work even faster than a potion. She thought about this for a moment. She said. I hope it's not too strong. We don't want to kill her. Yeah, Alex said. I want to get out of here, but I don't want to murder anyone. Oh no, Yasmin said, shaking her head. I'd feel bad, too. Well, sort of. But that's not the reason we don't want to kill her. Think about it. What happens if you're wrong about the bedroom door? What if it doesn't lead outside? It does, Alex says. I'm positive. Then what if the particular bone key has some sort of magical protection, Yasmin said, and Natasha is the only one who can use it? Oh, Alex said. He hadn't thought of that possibility. I see now what you mean. If something happens to Natasha, we might be trapped in the apartment forever. Eventually we'd just starve to death. He shuddered at his overactive imagination that sent him horrifying images of starvation. Lenore, sensing a sudden need for comfort, brushed against his legs. I really think animals can tell when you need a little bit of comfort. Because I know my pets, when I'm upset, they're immediately there to give me a little bit of love. So I think it's neat that J.A. White included this in his story with Lenore. Alex hesitated. Okay, where was I? I lost my spot. Didn't you just say it could kill Natasha? Or, wait, oh my goodness. Like, it's so funny when I lose my spot. I gotta go back. Oh, Alex said. He hadn't thought of that possibility. I see what you mean now. If something happens to Natasha, we might be trapped in the apartment forever. Eventually, we'd just starve to death. He shuddered. Okay, so I read that part. Oh, the comfort of the cat. That was always my argument with Eli. Whenever he said we should try to kill her, Yasmin said. Not that he listened in the end. I do have an idea, though. What if we put this off a few days and test the oil first? Make sure we know what it does. Didn't you just say it could kill Natasha? Alex asked. Not test it on us, Yasmin said, and she eyed Lenore. But there might be another living creature that could help us out. I mean, the oil probably works fine, so it'll just end up being a nice nap. Lenore looked from Yasmin to Alex with an expression of disbelief. Is she seriously suggesting this? Alex picked up the cat and held her close. Not going to happen, he said. Fine, said Yasmin. Then we'll just have to go into this blind. But yeah, you should probably have a story ready. Just in case. We don't really know what to expect. Weren't you working on a ghost one? That sounded pretty good. Still stuck, Alex said. Want to kick some ideas around? Alex hesitated, but only for a moment. Time was running out, and he needed all the help he could get. That'd be great, he said. Let's see, Yasmin said. My language arts teacher said you're supposed to write what you know. So, ever have any scary experiences? Well, this one time I was captured by a witch. Beside that. Okay, Alex said, taking a deep breath. There's one thing. I've never really told anyone about it, though. Yasmin took a seat on the floor and motioned for Alex to do the same. All we need is a campfire, she said. Come on, tell me. Says waiting for the 7 train with my parents. Not on one of the oldest platforms, but down on the Main Street station. There was a pretty bad snowstorm that day, so there weren't a lot of people out and about. The platform was empty. My parents were having some kind of serious talk with John, so I wandered away mostly out of boredom. I must have been 4 or 5 at the time. I crept down to the end of the platform just to see if the subway was coming. And deep in the tunnel, I saw these 2 red lights in the distance. At first I figured it was just a pair of signals or something. Alex swallowed slowly. But then they blinked. Yasmin's eyes widened. What happened next? She asked, transfixed. The eyes moved, Alex said. They got closer to the edge of the tunnel, to the border between the darkness and the light. I knew I should go back to my parents, but those red eyes hypnotized me. Alex rose to his feet, acting out his movements in the story. I got closer to the darkness. Closer. It was like I wasn't even controlling my own feet anymore. He knelt down, his face close to Yasmin's now. And then, the thing with the red eyes, It whispered something, he said. Yasmin leaned forward. What? She asked. Yasmin! She screamed, falling backwards. Got you, Alex said, laughing hard. I got you so good. You're the worst, she exclaimed, smacking him hard on the arm. For a second, Alex was afraid she was actually mad, but then he saw the huge smile on her face. Seriously, we are no longer friends. You have no choice, Alex said. I'm the only one here. Lenore, Yasmin said, turning towards the cat. Would you like to be my friend? My only friend? Lenore gave both of them a strange look, as though she would never understand humans, and disappeared. You just got rejected by a cat, Alex said. It kind of hurts, Yasmin said. You know, even though you're a total jerk, and I'm going to hate you forever, you did give me an idea. That story was scary because it was so normal. Everyone knows what a subway station is like at night. I could picture it in my head. So maybe you should write about something in your life. It doesn't even need to be anything scary at first. You can dress it up like that. Or dress it up that way. Take something real and make it creepy, Alex said, nodding his head. A lot of famous horror authors do that. Exactly, Yasmin said. Like imagine how you're going to write a story about someone you know. Who would you write about? My brother, Alex said without hesitation. Really? Yasmin asked in surprise. From what you say, I didn't think you guys were close. We're not, said Alex. That's the point. Every story needs conflict. And every moment with John, conflict. Maybe start with him then. Brothers who don't get along, Alex said, rolling it over in his head. And then add some of my other ideas. See what works best together. Like cooking, Yasmin replied, smiling. Maybe we're not so different after all. Except you're still a jerk, and I'm really nice. That's why Lenore likes me better. Lenore does not like you better. Enough yapping, she said, shoving him playfully towards the exit. You need to get to work. By the end of the day, Alex had started 4 different stories about brothers who couldn't get along. None of them were right. He began to wonder if the whole thing was a dead end. What am I going to do? As if they didn't have enough problems, Natasha seemed to be on to them. She barely said a word all evening, except to ask Alex for his nightbook. She examined it with surprising thoroughness, even pausing to read a page here and there, and then handed it back to him with a knowing look, as though a suspicion had been confirmed. As Alex read his story about a girl who gets a strange pet for her birthday, he felt her eyes watching him the entire time. She knows. But later, as he lay in bed, too worried to sleep, Alex changed his mind. If Natasha knew what we were up to, why didn't she do something about it right there and then? I'm just seeing shapes in the shadows. That's all. That made him feel a little better, but it didn't help him with his other problem, the story. What if I can't think of anything, he thought, heart racing. Will Natasha have time to turn me into one of her porcelain figurines before the sleeping whales kick in? He stared at the mattress above him, cycling through ideas like channels on a TV. Eyeglasses that let you see invisible monsters. A gravestone that yells at you when you die. A comic book shop that... And then it hit him. There you are, he exclaimed. Alex burst into laughter. He couldn't help it. The perfect idea had been in front of him the entire time. There was no sense trying to go back to sleep. His mind was awake and eager to work. Alex practically skipped to the library and hopped into his chair. The words came easily, as he knew they would. By late afternoon, he had finished his story. Ooh, so I can't wait to see what story he wrote. Problems and Solutions. Yasmin somehow found the time to make another incredible meal that night. Fried fish with sweet potato fries and homemade coleslaw. Alex pinched his fingers together, intending to steal just one tiny fry. Yasmin slapped his hand away. Fine, Alex whispered, but the moment she falls asleep, I'm eating these. Where did you learn to cook like this anyway? Maisito, Yasmin said. Oh, Alex said. He remembered Yasmin's story, the cruel way the apartment had captured her. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... It's okay, Yasmin said. Alex was surprised to see that she was smiling. I don't know why, but it doesn't hurt as much thinking about her now. Sito and I used to spend hours in the kitchen together. She was the only one who supported my dream. Yasmin's cheeks grew red. I want to open my own restaurant when I grow up, she added shyly. Cool, Alex said. What kind? Yasmin's face lit up. Vegetarian, she said. Mixed menu, American and Middle Eastern. And there's going to be a baseball theme. All the waiters and waitresses will wear uniforms. And this is my favorite part. Customers get a pennant that they can stick in the middle of their table like a flag, whatever their favorite team is. Even Yankees fans? I suppose, Yasmin said, rolling her eyes. That sounds amazing. There was an awkward pause. Both of them knew that they were killing time, nervously putting off the next step in their plan. After that, there would be no turning back. They stared at Natasha's glass, filled to the brim with lemonade. You should do the honors, Alex said. Yasmin withdrew a tiny vial from her pocket. It's still a little warm. The lemonade's cold, Alex said, reaching for a spoon. We'll mix it up. She'll never know. Okay, Yasmin said, slowly tilting the vial over the rim of the glass. Here goes nothing. A drop of clear oil fell into the lemonade. Alex waited for it to sink into the liquid and disperse. But instead, the oil spread across the surface, leaving a greasy scrim that stretched from one edge of the glass to the other. Alex stirred the lemonade. All that did was spread the oil around and make it even more obvious. Why isn't this working? Alex asked. The spoon clinked against the glass, faster and faster, in tune to his growing frustration. Is it because it's magic? Yasmin clapped a palm to her forehead. It's not a magic thing, she said. It's a chemistry thing. Oil doesn't mix with water. I'm such an idiot. Alex stopped stirring. The oil settled to the surface. There's no way to miss it. It's not your fault, he said. I didn't think of it either. Maybe she won't notice, suggested Yasmin. Alex shook his head and poured the ruined lemonade into the sink. We're going to have to think of something else, he said. We can't give this to Natasha. Can't give what to Natasha? While they were talking, the witch had entered the kitchen behind them. Alex had no idea how long she'd been there, what she'd overheard. From the corner of his eye, he saw Yasmin still had the vial of sleeping oil in her hand. She kept her back to Natasha, shielding the vial from view. Well, Natasha asked, stepping forward, what can't you give me? Your sweet potato fries, Yasmin said, smiling over her shoulder. Not without paprika. Yasmin was not a neat cook, and the kitchen counter was a mess. Carving board, garlic peels, breadcrumbs, knives, spatulas, eggshells, and half a dozen spice jars. In one smooth movement, she picked up the paprika and hid the vial behind a large container of oregano. It wasn't a great hiding spot by any means, but now it was the best they could do. Yasmin sprinkled the fries with the paprika. That's better, she said. All set now. She carried Natasha's dinner into the dining room while Alex poured a fresh glass of lemonade. He thought about trying to add another drop of oil. Maybe it will be less noticeable if I don't stir it this time. But Natasha was still standing in the doorway watching him. Let's go, storyteller, she said. You and I have something important to discuss tonight. And I'm itching to begin. There was a dangerous gleam in her eye, and Alex felt his body grow cold. Coming, he said. Without giving the vial another look, he walked past Natasha into the living room. Yasmin was standing in the corner, hands folded behind her back. She looked like she was doing her best not to cry. Alex knew how she felt. Their plan was ruined. Sit, Natasha said, indicating the chair next to hers. Alex hesitated, unsure if he had heard her correctly. He had never sat at the dining room table before. I don't understand, he said. Natasha flicked her fingers and the chair jerked backwards, scraping against the floor. Invisible hands shoved Alex into the seat. You don't have to understand, Natasha said. That's the joy of being a child. You just have to do as you're told. She sat at the head of the table and tossed a fry in her mouth. Paprika, she said, nodding with approval. Nice touch. Natasha seemed to be in a good mood. Alex didn't like that. At least when she was angry, he knew what to expect. Have you been enjoying your stay here? Natasha asked him, as though she was the concierge inquiring about his resort experience. Not really, said Alex. I disagree, replied Natasha. I know you love sharing your stories. There's no use denying it. And lately I can't help but notice that you developed a friendship with that one over there. She nodded her head in Yasmin's direction. You've tried to hide it from me. That was smart. But unlike the witch in that awful story you read me the other night, I'm not so easily fooled. Natasha took a large gulp of her lemonade and wiped her mouth clean with the back of her hand. It's all right, she said. It's better that the two of you have become friends. That will make tonight's lesson even more effective. She leaned forward, which brings me to my next question. Is there something you'd like to tell me, storyteller? Natasha studied his face. What do I say? Alex wondered, shifting in a seat. If she knew that they were planning to escape, things might go easier if he came clean now. But if she didn't know, and this was only a bluff, he glanced over the witch's shoulder at Yasmin, hoping for some guidance. Don't look at her, Natasha snapped. She's not part of this conversation. This is between me and you, witch and storyteller. I'll ask you again. What have you been doing every day? Writing, Alex said. Liar, Natasha screamed. If that had been the case, you would have finished dozens of stories by now. But you haven't. You've been reading me old stories instead. Alex stared at her, slack-jawed. Is that what she's so mad about? He thought, with something approaching relief. Maybe this isn't about our escape plan after all. How did you know? He asked, happy to keep the conversation on this track. All your old stories are in pen, Natasha said. Every single one. What little you've written since you've gotten here is in pencil. There aren't any pens in the library. Alex winced, mad at himself for not using the pen in his bag to keep his writing consistent. It was as careless an error as not capitalizing the first letter of a sentence. "I'm sorry," he said. "I meant to write more, but I haven't been able to concentrate. I miss my family, but I'm getting better. I've written 2 stories in the last few days." "Not good enough," Natasha said. She rose from her seat and opened the door of the china cabinet. "If you keep at this pace, you're going to run out of stories in no time flat, and that won't do. A little inspiration is in order. Something to help you understand the consequences if you don't take your writing duties more seriously." As Natasha talked, she carefully slid one figurine to the right, another to the left. "Are they still alive?" Alex wondered, his stomach churning. Can they feel her fingers wrapped around their bodies? "What you need," the witch said, "is an example to set you on the straight and narrow." Natasha stood back from the cabinet and grinned with malicious delight. She had made just enough room for one more figurine. "That's where Yasmin will go," Alex realized with a rush of horror. "Natasha's glad we've become friends because she knows how much more it will hurt me when I lose her." He could see from Yasmin's terrified expression that she had come to the same conclusion. "I hear what you're saying," Alex said, loud and clear. "I'll write a story a day, 2 stories. You don't have to hurt her." Natasha slammed her fist against the table. The glass of lemonade overturned, spilling its contents across the table. "I'm not finished," she exclaimed with barely restrained rage. "Maybe an example would do the trick, like I said. But there's a second possibility. Maybe it's you, Alex Mosher. You've created nothing but trouble since you've gotten here. There are other storybooks constantly being written, ones that aren't in my library. You can be replaced. It's convenient growing my own stories, like owning a vegetable garden, but all you really do is save me a trip to the bookstore." She gazed back and forth between the 2 children while making a clicking noise with her tongue. "The truth of the matter is I haven't decided which one of you to get rid of yet," Natasha said. "I'll make my decision while you read your story." She started to close the cabinet door, then stopped. "I guess I'll just leave this open for now." Natasha sat back down and took a bite of her fish, chewing it with a displeased look. She nodded towards her overturned glass. "Get me more lemonade. This fish is dry." Alex took the glass with trembling hands and entered the kitchen, as thoughts swirling, as if she's going to turn one of us into a statue. What do I do? He had to figure out a plan now, while he was alone. How can I stop her? He looked down into the empty glass in his hands. I have to risk it. If Alex didn't do anything, he or Yasmin would be sitting on the shelf by bedtime. But if he put another drop of oil in the lemonade, there was the slightest chance that Natasha might take a sip without noticing it. Maybe the oil works super fast, he thought. It might put her to sleep in the moment it touches her lips. It wasn't much, but a slight chance was better than no chance at all. He started to fill the glass with lemonade, but then stopped. Maybe it will mix together better if I put the oil in the glass first, he thought. It's worth a shot at least. Alex reached for the vial behind the oregano container. It wasn't there. No, he thought, that's impossible. He frantically searched the entire counter, knocking over a jar of basil and spilling dried mint from a loosely capped bottle onto the floor. The sleeping oil was gone. Oh my goodness, so where do you think it is? Do you think Natasha found it? After dinner, Alex lumbered into the living room, too stunned to speak. Natasha took the oil, he thought, taking his seat. It's the only explanation. She hadn't left the dining room at any point, but so what? Making a single vial disappear would be child's play for a witch. He watched Natasha ease into her chair and start up the oil diffuser. Her true age remained a mystery, but surely after being alive for so long, she needed to find new ways to relieve her boredom. She's probably known about our plan from the beginning, Alex thought, taking a seat. Toying with us is her idea of fun. He turned to Yasmin, wondering if she had any brilliant ideas, but she looked despondent. She had seen the vial was missing while clearing the table. They hadn't been able to talk about it, but Alex figured that she had come to the same conclusion as him. Natasha took a huge breath of blue mist and gazed at Alex expectantly. "Make this fast, storyteller," she said. "We have a busy night in front of us." He opened his nightbook. We were so close to escaping, he thought. Alex had written on more than one occasion about monsters who tore their victims' still beating hearts from their chests. Now he knew what it felt like. With a trembling voice, he started to read. So it's another one where it's typed in handwritten font. Here we go. The top, Bunk. When Keith learned that they were getting a new bunk bed, there was no doubt in his mind that he would be the one sleeping on top. After all, Keith was in the 5th grade and his brother Scott was in kindergarten. A normal little brother would have seen the logic in that. Scott was not normal. "Why should you get the top bunk and not me?" he asked. "It's not fair." Keith didn't bother to explain. He knew that it would make no difference. To Scott, things that happened the way he wanted them to, such as getting every single present on his Christmas list, were fair. Disappointing events such as losing a round of Super Smash Brothers were not fair. "You can have the top bunk in a few years," Keith said. "After that I'll move to my own room and—" "Not fair," Scott exclaimed. "I want the top bunk now." Keith smiled patiently, though inside he wanted to scream at the little brat, something that he wished his parents would do more often. If he lost his temper now, however, Scott would only burst into tears and run to Mom. Is that his plan, Keith wondered? Is he trying to get me in trouble? No one else would believe that a 5-year-old could be so manipulative. Then again, no one else understood Scott as well as Keith did. "Please," Scott begged. His upper lip quivered in that maddening way that adults found irresistible. "Could I please, please, please have the upper bunk?" Keith looked into his brother's big blue eyes, shiny with tears. "No," Keith said. "It's mine." Scott's eyes hardened. The tears stopped. He gave him the wicked smile that he reserved only for his brother. "Oh, look, Miss Sophia came to join us." "Hi, come on up, little girl." Oh my goodness, you need a hand? I know. Oh, that's so fun. Hi, beautiful. This is Miss Sophia, and she got a bath yesterday, so she is so clean and soft, and she's really warm right now because she's been sitting outside. We have a little patio, and she's been in the sun. That's my little girl. Hi. I'm glad you're here, puppy. All right, we're going to keep reading. Oh my goodness. Okay, so his little brother was like crying, giving him the look, and as soon as he realized it wasn't going to work, he made that evil smile. Keith thought of it as his real Scott smile. "We'll see about that," he said. In the days leading up to the bed's deliveries, Scott was a perfect little angel. He ate all his vegetables. He begged for stories and kisses instead of video games. He left tiny heart-shaped cards on his parents' pillow each night. And then, the night before the bed arrived, he struck the final blow. "I'm so small," Scott said at dinner while finishing the last of his Brussels sprouts. "At school, some of the other kids make fun of me." "What kids?" Mom asked. "I'll email their teacher and—" "I don't want to get anyone in trouble," Scott said. "I just wish I was big. That's all." His upper lip began to do its thing, quivering in that whimpering half-cry. "What is it, sweetie?" Mom asked, already lost. "I know I can't be big," Scott said in between tears, "but maybe I could feel big, like if I slept in the upper bunk, like a big boy would do. I think that would make me just feel a little better." Their parents exchanged a look of consideration. It was just long enough for Scott to glance in Keith's direction. He smiled, his real Scott smile. The next morning, Keith steeled himself for the bad news. He was used to Scott getting his own way, and he never argued when it happened. That was just the way things worked. It was the bed's assembly directions that saved the day. They stated in glorious red ink that kids 6 and under should sleep on the bottom bunk. Scott whined and pleaded and argued, but while the parents routinely gave in to his demands, when it came to playdates and screen time, they refused to budge on matters of safety. That night, Keith triumphantly claimed the top bunk, while Scott was forced to sleep on a lame 1.5 feet off the ground. "It's not fair," Scott mumbled after the lights had been turned off. "It's totally fair, and you know it," Keith said. "Can I sleep in the top bunk?" Scott asked. "Please?" "No," Keith said, and then, unable to resist, he added the top bunk is only for big kids. "Not fair," Scott said. "Whatever," Keith said. "Go to sleep." Keith figured that would be the end of it. He was wrong. "Can I sleep on the top bunk?" Scott asked the moment Keith's head touched the pillow the following night. "It's not fair. Let me sleep in the top bunk." Keith said no, but that didn't seem to matter to Scott. He asked again and again, long into the night. Keith hardly got any sleep at all. He told his parents the next morning. "Have a little patience," their father said, the tone of his words implying that Keith was at fault. "In a couple weeks, the poor little guy will forget about it." Except Scott, of course, wouldn't let it go. The talking was bad enough. But then about a week later, Scott found an old broom handle and began poking the bottom of Keith's thin mattress. And it didn't hurt. Scott didn't have the strength to press that hard, but it made sleeping impossible. "Can I sleep in the top bunk?" Scott asked. "Just for one night, please?" Keith was tempted to say yes just to get a good night's rest, but he knew it would be a mistake. Once Scott slept in the top bunk, it would prove to the parents that it was perfectly safe. After that, Keith wouldn't have a chance. Scott would win. The strange thing was Keith didn't even particularly like sleeping on the top bunk. It was hotter up there, and the ceiling felt like it was pressing down on him. If Scott had been a different sort of kid, Keith probably would have let him have it. But Scott was what he was, and Keith refused to give him his way. Then Scott died. It was a stupid way to die, running off after a ball like that. It wasn't even his favorite ball, just a moldy old thing that Scott had found under their stoop. He had been tossing it aimlessly against their garage door while Keith, on Scott duty, as his parents put it, sat on their front steps. When the ball skipped into the streets, Keith instantly saw the speeding car, Scott's headlong dash towards the road, the inevitable impact. "Scott," he screamed, rising from the steps. "Stop!" A normal kid would have stopped. Scott was not a normal kid. The night after the funeral, Keith thought about his brother while lying in bed. The little guy hadn't been all bad. Keith remembered a picture that Scott had drawn in preschool. Stick figures of two brothers, one big and one small, standing beneath the shining sun. He fell asleep with tears in his eyes. Keith was awoken by the opening of the bedroom door. It was the squeakiest in the house. His dad always meant to oil the hinges, but never got around to it. "Dad?" Keith mumbled, still groggy. "Mom?" They hadn't spoken to him much since the accident. They had said all the right things, of course. "It's not your fault. There's nothing you could have done. We love you." But what he really wanted was for them to take him in their arms like he was a little boy again. Only then would he truly believe that they didn't blame him for Scott's death. The door creaked open even wider. From Keith's elevated vantage point, he would have been able to see his dad's or his mom's head as they entered the room. He saw no one, leaving only two possibilities. Either the door had opened on its own, or whoever had opened it was a lot smaller than an adult. Footsteps scampered across the carpet. Blankets rustled as someone settled into the bottom bunk. Keith remained perfectly still. An invisible weight seemed to be pressing down on him. He wanted to shout for his mom or dad, but it suddenly required all his energy just to keep breathing. "Keith," a quiet voice whispered beneath him. "Can I have the top bunk?" Keith tried to scream, but all that came out was a soft whimper. He was too terrified to leave the bed. If he did, he would have to go past the bottom bunk. He would have to see. "Scott," Keith whispered, "is that you? Give me the top bunk." It was his brother's voice, all right, only hoarser, as though Scott had been screaming. This isn't happening, Keith thought. Scott's dead. This is a nightmare. It's only a... Something jabbed him in the back. Keith figured it was the broom handle, only Scott had never been able to push it this hard before. "It's not fair," Scott whispered, his voice closer now. He was standing on the lower mattress. "I want the top bunk." "I'm sorry," Keith said. A foul stench had suddenly filled the room. "I'm so sorry about what happened." Something jabbed him again, harder this time. The mattress lifted into the air for a moment before crashing back down onto its frame. "Can I sleep on the top bunk?" Scott asked. "Please?" The force of his last words seemed to puncture something within Scott's body. Air hissed like a leaking balloon. "Please," Scott repeated. Keith could hear the desperation and fear in his brother's voice. He's all done, Keith thought. He might not even understand what's happening to him. "If I let you sleep in the top bunk," Keith asked quietly, "will you go?" There was a long pause. The lower bunk squeaked as Scott shifted his weight from foot to foot. Keith heard dirt and pebbles patter to the mattress. "You'll never see me again," Scott said. "Pinky promise." "All right," Keith said. "You can have the top bunk tonight, only." He hesitated, not wanting to leave the false armor of his blankets, but he knew that there was no other way. "I'll come down the ladder and go. I'm not going to turn around. I'm not going to look." Scott didn't say a word. Before Keith could lose his nerve, he threw off the covers and settled his left foot on the ladder, staring straight ahead at the bedroom wall as he descended the rungs. Second step. Third. A hand grabbed his ankle. It was cold and small, but strong enough to jerk him off his feet. Keith crashed to the floor. He turned over. A familiar figure crouched over him in the darkness, perched on the edge of the bottom bunk like a gargoyle. It craned its head forward and into the beam of moonlight shining through the window, and Keith saw a face crusted with dirt and mud that didn't even look like his brother anymore. "It's not fair," he said in his raspy voice. "How come you get to live and I don't?" Keith had no time to scream. His brother pounced from the bottom bunk and landed on top of him. Mrs. Block woke up early the next morning, anxious to set things right. They'd been so devastated by Scott's death that they'd completely ignored their oldest son. Knowing Keith, he probably blames himself, Mrs. Block thought, her heart aching for their quiet, sensitive child. He's mourning too. I need to be there for him. When he entered the bedroom, Keith was still asleep in the top bunk. There was a peculiar smell in the room, like food that had gone bad. She would clean that up later. Right now, Mrs. Block just wanted to see her son. She stood on the bottom step of the ladder and stared down at him, sleeping peacefully. He had his arm wrapped around one of Scott's stuffed dogs. He must miss him so much, Mrs. Block thought, stroking his curly blonde hair. Keith's eyes opened. Mrs. Block gasped in shock. Keith had his father's eyes, a deep, solemn brown, but now they looked bright blue, like Scott's eyes, she thought. Then Keith blinked and saw that his eyes were the same brown that they'd always been. Mrs. Block decided that exhaustion was making her see things that weren't really there. "I was so scared, Mommy," Keith whispered, wrapping his arms around her. His voice seemed higher pitched than before. Mrs. Block held him tight. It had been a long time since Keith had hugged her, and this uncharacteristic show of affection filled her with joy. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Block said, tears coming freely now. "We should have been there for you, but everything is going to be okay now." They held each other for a long time. When they parted, Keith looked up at her with wide eyes. His upper lip quivered. "I like the top bunk," he said. Ooh, that is a scary story. Oh my goodness. Alex closed the nightbook and looked over at Natasha. Despite everything, he was curious if she had liked the story or not. Her eyes were closed. "Natasha?" Alex asked. No response. He put his ear next to the invisible wall and heard a gentle, rhythmic snoring. "What are you doing?" Yasmin asked, watching him with a befuddled expression. From her vantage point, she could see Natasha's face. "She's asleep, Alex." She couldn't see Natasha's face. "She's asleep," Alex said. "No way," replied Yasmin, springing from the love seat. She cupped her hands to her eyes and peered through the blue mist. "Natasha never fell asleep during one of your stories before. This can't be a coincidence." "It has to be connected to the sleeping oil," Alex agreed, hope rising. "But how?" "Natasha!" Yasmin exclaimed, banging on the walls of the misting room. "What are you doing?" Alex asked, grabbing her arm. "We need to see if this is a magic sleep or a regular sleep before we do anything stupid," replied Yasmin. She screamed at the top of her lungs. "Wake up!" Natasha didn't stir. No question about it, this wasn't a normal type sleep. "The sleeping oil worked," Yasmin said in astonishment. "But how? We never gave it to her." "Maybe there was still little left on one of her lemonade glasses," Alex suggested. "You said it was super concentrated." "She's totally out, though," Yasmin said, examining Natasha from all angles. "Like Sleeping Beauty out." "Could she be faking it?" "What for? So she can jump out and yell gotcha?" "She might like that," Alex said. "Get her hopes up, then destroy them completely." "Yeah, I guess you're right." The oil diffuser cycle was coming to an end now, blue mist puffing out in fits and starts. Finally, it stopped altogether. Alex reached out, feeling for the nearest wall. It was gone. "What now?" he whispered. Grab her keys, just like we planned, but fast. Who knows how long she'll be asleep." Natasha was wearing a dark silk shirt and black pants. There was an odd-shaped lump in her left pocket. Partially wedged between the chair and Natasha's thigh, the bone keys, Alex thought. Unfortunately, they weren't within easy reach. It would require some digging to pull them out. "Me or you?" Alex asked. "Me," Yasmin said. She didn't explain why. She didn't need to. Yasmin was nimble. Alex was not. It made sense. "Be careful," Alex said. Yasmin took a deep breath and stretched her fingers like a pianist before a recital. She crept forward and knelt on the floor, and then, after a moment's hesitation, slid her index finger and thumb into Natasha's pocket. As Yasmin dug deeper, Alex watched the witch's face carefully for any sign that she was about to wake up. For now, at least, her snoring continued unabated. "I feel them," Yasmin whispered, barely, with my fingertips. She tried to get a good grip, changing position several times. Ugh, I can't get a hold of them. The keys are squished against this stupid chair. Why don't you move for a little bit? Alex asked. You're sure it's a good idea? Nope. Alex stepped forward and placed his hands just behind Natasha's shoulders, locking his elbows to maintain as much distance from the witch as possible. Still, it was a lot closer than he ever wanted to get. Her hair smelled of smoke and a sweet, fruity shampoo, like something a child might use. Looking away, Alex planted his feet and twisted his hips, aiming to turn Natasha's body just enough for Yasmin to grab the keys. He forgot to support the witch's head, however, and it fell to the side, striking the wooden frame of the chair with a loud thunk. She stopped snoring. Alex froze in horror. He wanted to let go of Natasha. Get away! Get away! But he was afraid of the slightest movement that might wake her. He remained still, watching her face, waiting for her eyes to open. A lifetime later, wet, ragged snores filled the living room. Alex thought it was the most beautiful sound that he had ever heard. Yasmin went back to work, and in one unexpected rush of movement, the keys slid free. Score, he said, raising them in triumph. Alex carefully released Natasha's shoulders and wiped his sweaty palms on his pants. He knew he should be excited, but the mystery of how Natasha fell asleep was still nagging at him. It didn't make sense, unless... Alex got down on his belly and reached beneath the footstool, finding nothing but empty space. He crawled forward, tapping the wooden floor around the chair. Have you gone crazy? Yasmin asked. Let's go. We have the bone keys. One more second. He checked behind the chair. That's where he found her. A warm, invisible body covered with soft fur. It's Lenore, Alex said. Yasmin crawled over to join him, carefully lowering her hand until she felt the cat as well. What's she doing here? Yasmin asked. Lenore must have been in the kitchen with us, Alex said. She heard we were in trouble, so she took the vial of sleeping oil. Then she hid here, behind the chair. When Natasha turned the diffuser on, Lenore was behind the magic walls. And then she poured the sleeping oil in the machine while you were reading your story, Yasmin said, nodding. Natasha was distracted. She wouldn't have noticed an invisible cat. Alex felt Lenore's chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. But of course Lenore inhaled the sleeping oil too, he said. She was trapped as Natasha. She was as trapped as Natasha. That was so brave, Yasmin said. Our little hero. She looked up at Alex. We can't leave her here. Of course not. He slipped his hands beneath the cat and slowly got to his feet. It was harder than he wanted to admit. Lenore was heavy to begin with, and Alex's subpar diet since becoming Natasha's prisoner had sapped his strength. You okay? Yasmin asked. I'm fine, he said, keeping his eyes on Natasha. But we have no idea how long the spell is going to last. Let's get out of here while we still can. I just have to grab our stuff first. We have stuff? Ignoring his question, Yasmin opened the closet door and dug out Alex's backpack. She had patched a hole in the bottom with duct tape. Food, water, coats, she said, slinging the backpack over her shoulder. You said you saw trees, Alex. That doesn't sound like Flushing. The last thing we want to do is make it this far and then die in a giant forest. Good point, she said. They ran down the hallway to Natasha's bedroom door. Yasmin picked through the bone keys on the ring. The one she settled on was yellow and brittle. It looked older than the others. It's not going to work, Alex thought as she slid the key into the crescent-shaped hole. There's going to be another spell at play, like the one that turns the front door into a wall, and we'll find out that only Natasha can... The key turned. Yasmin released the breath she had been holding and opened the door. So, make predictions. Do you think it's going to work? Do you think it's not going to work? If you've been listening this whole time, do a little stretch. Whew. Hopefully the leaf blower sound isn't too loud. There's a guy outside doing the reading as he goes, or the leaf blowers as he goes. I gotta take a little stretch. Oh, this is daily. It's hard work reading, I tell you. Okay, so this is chapter 18. There's only, oh my gosh, there's about 5 chapters left, but we are finishing this. We're doing it. Chapter 18, The Other Side. Alex stepped over the threshold into a forest that stretched out in every direction. Tall pine trees seemed to touch the night sky. He instantly felt woozy. The amount of open space was overwhelming, like a burst of oxygen, after holding your breath for a long time. We're outside, he said in disbelief. Yasmin shuffled past him, gazing up at the sky in open-mouthed wonder. Suddenly she fell to her knees. There were tears flowing from her eyes. "I can't believe it," she said. "After all this time, I never thought I would see trees again." "Same here," Alex said. He wiped a stray tear from his own eye. "Yasmin?" She looked up. "Can you lock the door, please?" he asked. With a startled gasp, Yasmin stumbled to the door frame that sat in the center of the clearing. From the sides and back, it didn't look special at all, just 3 wooden beams nailed together on a rectangular shape. It was only by looking through the frame, dead on, that one was able to see the hallway of the apartment. Yasmin closed the door and turned the bone key. The lock clicked into place. "Do you really think that's going to keep her out?" she asked. "I hope so," Alex said. "Those keys seem pretty one-of-a-kind, but who knows? Maybe Natasha has an extra set somewhere." "Let's make sure we're long gone by then," Yasmin said. Alex looked around. The trees that surrounded them were packed closely together except for a small gap directly across from the door. A path led into deeper darkness. "Guess we're going that way," he said. They left the clearing and passed between the trees. There were no stars in the sky, making it difficult to see. The twisting trail was just wide enough for the 2 of them to walk side by side, their footsteps muffled by pine needles. "Why isn't it cold out?" Yasmin said. The forest, especially at night, should have been freezing this time of year, yet the air was warm and balmy, without a single breeze to stir the trees. "We passed through a magic portal," Alex said. "We could be anywhere in the world right now, someplace warm." But Yasmin didn't seem to be listening to him. Her attention was elsewhere. "That's widow grub," she said, pointing to a yellow fungus growing at the base of a tree. It glowed gently, providing a little light for them to see. "And look over there. That patch of purple flowers? Sunken lily. Sure, we could be any place on Earth, but what kind of forest has magical plants?" This must be where Natasha gets her ingredients," Alex said. "You didn't answer my question." "I don't know," he said. "All we can do is keep—" A branch snapped, cutting through an eerie silence of the forest, like a gunshot. "What was that?" Yasmin whispered. "Do you think Natasha's awake already?" Alex shook his head. "That didn't come from the direction of the door," he said. "It's probably just an animal or something." "What kind of animal?" They heard a second branch snap, a third, and then, as if some sort of gate had been lifted, an avalanche of sounds, rustling, clicking, the clap of approaching footsteps. This wasn't just one animal. It was an entire herd, and it was heading in their direction. The children ran. Alex heard movement to the left and saw an odd-shaped pair of red eyes following him from in between the trees. They bobbed up and down, as though the owner of the eyes was galloping. A horse? Alex thought. He turned his head to get a closer look and nearly lost his balance. Just keep moving, he thought, focusing on the trail. Carrying Lenore was starting to take its toll. His legs were weak and rubbery, his heart an angry prisoner drumming fits against its cage. More creatures joined the ones hunting them, their hoofbeats rising to a deafening crescendo. It was like being trapped in the middle of a stampede. "They're so close," he wondered. "Why don't they attack?" He tripped. As he fell, Alex used his arms to cushion Lenore and landed hard on his elbows. They rang out in excruciating pain. He lay there for a few moments, tasting blood in his mouth. The creatures came to a halt around him. Alex turned his head and saw narrow white legs standing just beyond the path. He looked up. The thing staring down at him was cut from the fabric of nightmares. It had the body of a horse, but its black hair was missing in patches, revealing large swaths of oozing skin. One eye was the size of a coffee saucer, the other no bigger than a quarter. Both were red. The worst part, however, was the black horn that protruded from the top of its head, as sharp as any blade. "It's a unicorn, or at least it used to be." Alex's fertile mind instantly recognized that there were connections to be made here. A girl who loves unicorns, deformed, unicorn-type creatures. It was too strange and specific to be a coincidence. Solving that mystery would have to wait. However, right now he needed to focus on staying alive. At least 24 unicorns were packed together along each side of the path, like a crowd gathering at a zoo exhibit. As one, they bent their heads and speared their horns forward. Alex screamed, certain that he was about to be impaled in several places, but the sharp tips of the horns fell just short of his body. He looked at the unicorns in bewilderment as they readied themselves for a second attack. All they have to do is take a single step forward, Alex thought. Why do they keep their distance? They jabbed again, fell short. Gathering his senses, Alex noticed that their horns never crossed the clearly defined line separating the path from the forest. It was as though there was an invisible wall there. Magic, Alex concluded. He scooped up Lenore and got to his feet. Yasmin had stopped about 10 yards ahead of him. A second pack of unicorns surrounded her, pressing as close to the trail as possible, without actually setting foot in it. Yasmin turned from side to side, unsure what to do. There was a bloody gash on her arm. "Stay on the path," Alex exclaimed. "They can't reach you there." Alex took a few hesitant steps forward. The unicorns followed him by shuffling their feet to the side. Their horn jabs grew frenzied and desperate. Yasmin waited for him until he caught up. "What are these things?" she asked. "Monsters," Alex said. "No time to figure it out now. As long as we stay on the path, we should be safe." "Well, maybe not safe exactly. More like not dead." "Close enough," said Yasmin. "Your arms must be killing you. Let's trade." Alex was too tired to argue. He gratefully exchanged Lenore for the backpack full of supplies. After that, they navigated the trail at a half jog, too nervous to run and risk falling. The unicorns kept pace. Every so often, one of them jabbed too far and recoiled in agony as silver light sparked from its horn. Maybe the unicorns attack anyone who comes here, Alex thought, including Natasha. That would explain why there's a protection spell on the path. But then why doesn't she just kill the unicorns and be done with it? That seems more Natasha's style. And what does all this have to do with Unicorn Girl? Alex's stomach churned as a horrible thought occurred to him. Did Natasha turn the poor girl into one of these monsters as a special punishment when she tried to escape? What about the other unicorns? Are they all prisoners too? Alex's head spun. By opening the door to the outside world, he had somehow found more questions than answers. The trail narrowed. Less than a foot separated them from the unicorn horns now. Alex felt like he was walking through a cave booby-trapped with spikes. "Still, think we're in a regular old forest?" Yasmin asked, carefully placing one foot in front of the other, as though walking along a tightrope. "We're outside the apartment," Alex said. "At least that's—" He nearly fell backwards as the lead unicorn kicked its front hooves in the air and neighed. The others joined in shrill, sad chorus. Alex covered his ears. The unicorns spun in circles, bit one another, rammed trees with their horns. Finally, they pranced away like deer fleeing a hunting party. "What was that?" Yasmin asked. Something spooked them. Yasmin looked nervously into the trees. "I don't see anything. You think it's Natasha?" "Lenore's not awake yet," Alex said. "That means Natasha should still be sleeping too." "Or maybe the sleeping oil affects people and cats differently," Yasmin said. "Who knows? They don't exactly teach you this stuff in school." She exhaled with relief. "At least the monsters are gone." "Yeah," Alex said, scanning the trees. "What could have made them react that way?" He noticed a tree in the distance whose bark had been gouged away. There was something underneath it. Pretty weird that it's unicorns, don't you think, after what we read in the library? This whole thing is weird, but yeah, we're missing something. "What is that?" Alex wondered, looking closer at the tree. He cleaned his glasses on the bottom of his shirt, and then looking left and right, as though crossing a street, stepped off the path to get a better look. "Hey," Yasmin exclaimed. "What are you doing? Those things might come back." He saw what lay beneath the bark. For a few moments he couldn't breathe. A heavy gloom cloaked his heart. Please don't be true, he thought. Please just be my overactive imagination doing its thing. "Look," he said, pointing at the tree. "Do you see it?" The shocked expression on Yasmin's face was all the confirmation he needed. That's why it isn't cold, he thought. That's why there aren't any stars in the sky. That's why magical plants grow here. Beneath the bark of the tree was a second skin, red wallpaper with a black floral pattern. "We're still inside the apartment," Yasmin said. "We never left. There's no way to escape." Alex's tone was clipped and matter-of-fact, all hope scrubbed away. "We're never going to see our families again." "Stop that," Yasmin said, taking him by the shoulders. "There has to be a reason why Natasha never let us inside this particular—" She paused, considering the trees around her. "Room. There must be something special about it. Let's find out what it is." "Our plan failed." "You're absolutely right," Yasmin said. "But you, of all people, should know." "What we do then?" "What?" "We revise." Alex looked into the eyes of the girl who had become his best friend in the world. The fog around his heart began to dissipate. "There might be another exit," he said. "We have to keep looking." Yasmin grinned. "That's better," she said. They climbed upward. Alex's legs throbbed in protest. He was no longer feeling hopeless, but he was still worried. What frightened the unicorns away? Something bigger? Scarier? Whatever it must be, close. The unicorns ran away at the bottom of this hill, so what's waiting for us on the other side? The incline grew sharper, and they headed towards a peak just 20 yards away. A sheen of sweat gathered between Alex's back and the backpack. He glanced at the forest behind them and wondered if they were going in the wrong direction. We have to find out, he thought, swallowing his fear. There's no turning back. Steeling himself for a new horror that would put the unicorns to shame, Alex crossed the remaining distance to the top of the hill at a run. In the clearing before him was a tiny house made entirely of candy. Shortbread cookies composed the exterior walls, with the occasional row of chocolate bricks for stability. Frosting caked the roof like snow. Peppermints framed sugar glass windows latticed with gingerbread. So I want you to make a picture in your mind of the forest, of the unicorns, and now this house. What story is it from? Hansel and Gretel, yeah. Alex turned to Yasmin. He was certain her startled expression mirrored his own. "That's the house from the fairy tale," Yasmin said. "The one with the two kids whose dad leaves them in the woods." "Hansel and Gretel," Alex said. "There's a witch in that one, too, isn't there? And breadcrumbs. I remember breadcrumbs." She knelt in the dirt and pressed her face into her hands. "But it's not real. None of this is supposed to be real." Alex took a seat next to Yasmin. She seemed more confused than ever, but to Alex things were finally starting to make sense. "I think Natasha is the same witch that captured Hansel and Gretel," he said. "That's a story." "Apparently not," Alex said, assembling the pieces on the fly. "Think about it. Natasha's apartment is just like that house down there, only instead of tempting kids with candy, it uses whatever they love most. Unicorns, scary movies, grandmas." "Like an update," Yasmin said, mulling it over. "A more modern version." "Exactly," Alex said. "Natasha's been alive for a long time. This proves it. In the old days, I'm sure kids got lost in the woods all the time, but now, an apartment is a better bet if you want to catch anyone." "How many kids has she—" Yasmin started. Her face set into a look of grim determination. "We can't just escape, Alex. We have to stop her." Alex nodded. "Let's take a closer look," he said. "Who knows?" asked Yasmin, straightening her cap. "Maybe we'll see Snow White or Rapunzel. At this point, nothing would surprise me." They followed a jelly bean graveled path to the front door, a slab of white chocolate panels stuck together with some kind of jam. The smell was overwhelming, a storm of sweetness that bombarded Alex's mind with delicious memories, licking chocolate batter straight from the bowl, biting into the first piece of candy at Halloween, ice cream melting on his tongue. His stomach grumbled. Alex had never been so hungry in his life. Another trick, he thought, tottering on his feet, as the sweets beckoned him like a physical force. Alex hesitated with his hand over the doorknob. It looked like one of those button candies that you eat off long sheets of wax paper. He longed to taste it. "Something's wrong," he said. "I think we better get out of here." Yasmin didn't respond. He turned around and saw her shoveling giant marshmallows into her mouth. "I'm sorry," she said. "So hungry. I can't stop. I can't." She collapsed onto the ground. Marshmallows rolled out of her outstretched hands. "Yasmin!" Alex exclaimed, only the word sounded funny to him, garbled. Then he realized, my mouth is full. He tasted something blissfully sweet and saw the candy doorknob in his hand, or rather, half the candy doorknob. "I don't even remember taking a bite," he thought, still chewing. A soothing warmth spread throughout his body. He fell. So there's some sort of magic making the kids eat. They can't seem to help it. I keep a sketchbook. I know when we read Fish in a Tree, she had a sketchbook of impossible things that we read about by, I think it's Linda Millay Hunt wrote that book. And in that, I did a sketch a little while ago around wintertime that was about a gingerbread house. And so I drew the traditional gingerbread house kind of like in this story that they're describing. And then I did some sketches of impossible things, and one of them was a house made of my favorite foods. So I made a sushi house with all different rolls and a moat of soy sauce with really spicy wasabi fences. And then I made one for Thanksgiving with mashed potatoes and things like that. So that might be kind of a fun thing to design your own food house, kind of like the the candy house, but in your own style. And I'll try to dig that out so I can show you guys about it. But kind of a fun idea. So we're on chapter 19, Natasha's story. The entire world was shaking. Alex groggily opened his eyes. He heard rattling glass, felt something solid vibrating beneath his head. He tried to remember where he was. Candy house, he thought, the gears of his brain beginning to spin. I ate a doorknob? Why did I eat a doorknob? The world blurred into focus. He was on the floor of a kitchen. It looked like something you might see during a field trip to a historical village. Stone floor and walls, long benches beneath a simple wooden table. Across from him was a massive iron door. It was partially open, revealing a deep recess filled with charred wood. I'm inside the candy house, Alex thought. That's the oven from the fairy tale where the witch... Terror slapped him awake. He pushed himself onto a sitting position. As he did, the room finally stopped shaking. Behind him, a chopping noise. Alex straightened his glasses and turned around. Natasha was standing on the other side of the room. She wasn't facing him, but he could see the butcher's knife in her hand. She raised and lowered it with violent enthusiasm, hacking away at something on the wooden counter in front of her. Finally, Natasha said, without turning around. It's been almost 2 days. I thought you were never going to wake up. Even after all these years, the magic in that candy still packs a wallop. Lure kids into eating it whenever they want to or not. And then, there's little else to do but wait. You know how powerful sleeping spells can be, don't you, Alex? To Natasha's left, a cauldron hung from an iron hook. Steam rose from its surface, courtesy of the flickering flames beneath it. The spicy smell of stew filled the room. Where's Yasmin? He asked. Alive, Natasha said. For now, provided you help me. Help you with what? Natasha flung a handful of something red and stringy into the cauldron. It made a sizzling noise as it hit the broth. You felt the house rumble, Natasha said. The third time this hour. It's getting worse. She needs a story, Alex. I tried reading her one of the old ones from the library. It doesn't work anymore. She only wants yours. What do you mean she? Alex asked. I thought you said the stories were for the apartment. Natasha slammed the knife down. She is the apartment, Alex. Don't you understand anything? They're one and the same now. Natasha turned around. Her face was haggard and drawn, her eyes sunk deep into their sockets. Would you like to hear a story? She asked. Alex nodded and pulled himself onto a bench at the kitchen table. Things were still fuzzy, and the longer Natasha talked, the more time he had to clear his head. He would have been at his best. He would have to be at his best to rescue Yasmin. The stew popped and bubbled. How old do you think I am? Natasha asked. Alex considered the question. What should I admit I know? He decided that the time for deceit had passed. In your hundreds? Alex said. I'm 29. You look 29, Alex corrected, but you've been alive for 29 years, Natasha said. Almost 30. I was going to give you a slice of my birthday cake in a few weeks. I don't see that happening now. That can't be right, Alex said, shaking his head. The blue mist. Ah, said Natasha, amused. You thought it was, what, some kind of immortality oil? Doesn't exist. The blue mist, is it magic? Oh, it's magic, all right, just not the kind you're thinking of. We'll get to that later. Let me start from the beginning. She stirred the stew with a long wooden ladle. When I was a little younger than you, about 20 years ago, Aunt Grease took me prisoner. The who? Alex asked, baffled. Took you prisoner? What are you talking about? Her full name was Griselda, Natasha said, snapping the syllables with her tongue, but she insisted that we call her Aunt Grease. She was the original witch who lived in the apartment. For all I know, she might be the original witch, period. She created all this. The candy house, the forest, the magic rooms. Natasha smiled slightly. You'll never believe how she tricked me into crossing the threshold. I was obsessed with unicorns at the time, and I followed one inside the apartment building, Alex said, the words spilling from his stunned lips. Natasha stopped stirring. How did you know that? She asked. You're Unicorn Girl, Alex exclaimed, dizzy with revelation. What? You never wrote your name, he added, so that's what we called you. We read what you wrote inside the storybooks when you were a girl. Natasha straightened, the gears of her memory starting to turn. I did write in storybooks, didn't I? She asked. It seems so long ago. Another life. That's how you knew about the sleeping oil, isn't it? Alex nodded. Only I never wrote down the final ingredient, so how... Natasha looked abashed, like a student who finally figures out an answer that should have been obvious from the start. That story about the baker's daughter, you tricked me into telling you. Yes, Alex said. Natasha looked at him with something approaching respect. "You're smarter than you look, storyteller," she said. Alex disagreed. If he was that intelligent, he would have figured out Natasha's true identity long ago. As it was, his understanding of past events had been completely shattered, making him wonder what else he had gotten wrong. He felt like he had been reading the pages of a story in the wrong order. "Aunt Grease," Alex said, pushing his glasses back. "You don't mean to say that she's the witch from Hansel and Gretel, do you?" "That's just a story. It never really happened." "Says the boy sitting in a house made of candy," Natasha replied, raising her eyebrows. "I don't know who came first, the witch or the story. In any case, she's the one who's been alive forever. It wasn't any oils or potions that did it, though. No, the magic Aunt Grease used was far older than that. She ate children and devoured their youth." Natasha's eyes looked past him at the massive oven built into the wall. Alex took a quick glance and turned away, his imagination blasting him with unwanted images. "I used to love the witch in Hansel and Gretel," he thought. The way she tried to fatten Hansel up so there would be more of him to cook. So creepy. That was before I knew she was real. "I wasn't the only one she captured," Natasha said, staring at the oven with great intensity. "There was a boy a few years older than me, Ian. He watched out for me, taught me what I needed to do to stay safe, until Aunt Grease started to grow old again and needed to replenish her lost youth." Natasha scrubbed her hands together as though washing them beneath running water. "She made me clean the oven afterwards. Closed the door behind me until it was all spick and span. I was in there for hours, in the dark. That was the day I decided that I was never going to be powerless again." Alex felt a chill run up his spine. Unicorn Girl climbed into the oven that day, he thought, and someone completely different climbed out. It made him sad. "I waited for my opportunity," Natasha said. "I read Aunt Grease her nightly tale and played the faithful little servant. The library, if you haven't guessed by now, belonged to her. She's the one obsessed with scary stories." Natasha's expression grew sly. "But I pretended to love them, just like her, and in time Aunt Grease grew to trust me. One day she took me through her secret door to this very kitchen, and told me how the apartment was just a facade to trick children. The true house, the one that we're sitting in, is in right now. It's the beating heart, the source of all the magic." Natasha ladled stew into 2 clay bowls. She slid one across the table and took a seat. "She taught me a few potions, too," Natasha continued. "Nothing complicated, nothing that she ever imagined I could use against her. But she understood my gift for such things, and one night we were here in the candy house just before story time. I slipped a sleeping potion into her tea. She fell to the floor, and I listened ever so carefully until her breathing became slow and steady. Then I raised my knife into the air." She glanced at Alex's stew. "You're not eating." "What?" he asked, as though awoken from a dream. "I'm not hungry." "Are you sure?" Natasha stirred her stew with a wooden spoon. Steam rose in undulating waves. "I made it special, just for you." Alex stared down at his bowl with a growing sense of dismay. He had never smelled stew like this before. He poked it with his spoon. Chunks of white meat bobbed to the surface. A horrible thought slithered into his mind. "Where's Lenore?" he asked quietly. "Lenore?" Natasha asked, lingering on the word, as though it were the name she hadn't heard in years. "You mean the useless beast who betrayed me?" She took a healthy bite of the stew and chewed thoughtfully. "Don't worry about her." Alex stared down at the stew, fighting the nausea rising in his throat. She couldn't have, he thought. That's too horrible even for her. "Wait," Natasha exclaimed, choking back laughter. "Do you think I cooked the cat?" "Didn't you?" Alex asked. Natasha exploded with laughter. She pounded the table, guffawing uncontrollably. "Why in the world would I ruin a perfectly good stew?" she asked. "You know how old that cat is? She's probably all string and gristle inside." Unsure what to believe, Alex re-examined the stew in front of him. "I guess that could be chicken," he thought. "And as for the strange smell, who knows what weird spices she threw in there." "At first I was mad you tried to escape," Natasha said, "and I won't lie. I considered some pretty horrific punishments. But then I remembered that I had done the exact same thing when I was your age, which got me to thinking maybe things could be different between us. That's why I'm telling you my story, Alex. You're a child of darkness, just like me. You don't need to return to a world that doesn't understand. You can make a home here as I have, not as my captive, as a friend." Alex stared at Natasha in utter disbelief. "I'm nothing like you," he started to scream. "You've hurt people. How can I ever be your friend?" But then he saw Natasha's downcast eyes and the nervous way she plucked at the tiny hairs on her arm, and a shocking realization kept him from speaking. She's lonely, he thought. It was strange to imagine that Natasha might desire human companionship just like anyone else, but he supposed it made sense. She had been alone in the apartment for 2 decades. He had no desire to be her friend, of course, but he couldn't just turn her down. She'd be furious, and then Alex wouldn't be able to help Yasmin and Lenore at all. I have to go along with it for now, he thought. Put her at ease. I didn't want to admit it at first, Alex said, managing a small smile, but in a strange way, I do feel at home here. I knew it, Natasha exclaimed, throwing her arms into the air. She seemed so genuinely thrilled that Alex almost felt guilty for lying to her. You won't regret this, Alex. Of course, you're going to have to work your way back into my trust, but after that, things are... The house trembled. Stew spilled down the swinging cauldron and splattered into the flames. The disturbance only lasted a few seconds, but it wasn't long enough to apply a fresh coat of worry to Natasha's face. We can't wait here any longer, she said, sliding off the bench. You have to tell her a story, something she's never heard before. Why do you keep saying she? Alex asked. Natasha smiled with wicked delight as she wrapped her arms around his shoulder. Forget about all your ghosts and goblins and vampires, she said. I'm going to show you something truly scary. Chapter 20, Aunt Grease. Whew, here we go, guys. Natasha led him along a dank corridor into a circular chamber. There was a coffin at its center. It was made from a blue crystalline material, rock candy, Alex thought, and suspended from the ceiling by black licorice. To its left sat a silver machine, similar to Natasha's oil diffuser, but much larger. A long plastic tube connected the machine to a nozzle in the bottom of the coffin. Red mist swirled through the tube, clouding the crystalline walls of the coffin and obscuring its interior. Alex, shouted a familiar voice. He spun around. Iron gates were evenly spaced around the stone, like a wall, like the numbers on a clock. Behind them, he could see tiny cells. This must be where Aunt Grease kept her captives back in the fairy tale days, he thought. Yasmin was in a cell on the opposite side of the chamber, her face pressed against the bars. At some point, she had lost her cap. As Yasmin brushed her hair from her eyes, Lenore peeked out from between her legs and regarded Alex like a child arriving late to class. Where have you been? Alex, Yasmin asked. She took in the situation with a perplexed expression. Why was he standing beside Natasha and making no attempt to help her? Are you under a spell? Quiet, girl, Natasha said. The storyteller is no longer your friend. He's with me now. Isn't that right? Natasha stared hard at Alex, daring him to contradict her. That's right, he said. Sorry, Yasmin. This is who I really am. He saw the betrayal in Yasmin's eyes and quickly turned away, his heart aching. Natasha nodded with approval and led him to the coffin. Meet the great and powerful Aunt Grease, she said, running her hand along the jagged coffin lid. Before I could bring the knife down and finish what I started, the house sealed her inside this shell. It was protecting itself, you see. When a witch dies, all of her magic is undone. The house and everything connected to it would fall apart. The house is alive? Alex asked. It can't talk or anything like that, Natasha said, but it's like you and me, Alex. It knows how to survive. It connected itself to the witch, sapped her magic. This way it could offer me a reason to keep her alive. Natasha snapped a shard off the coffin lid and held it before her eyes. Light prismed through its craggy surface and cast her face in a sickly blue glow. It's made of candy, you know, she said. The first time I saw it, I couldn't resist taking a tiny nibble, just to see what would happen. That was a mistake. I was sick for weeks. But the power it gave me, the things I could do. Her eyes glowed with remembrance. I cast my first spell, by mistake. I held my unicorn pendant in my hand and wished it was real. And there they were. It created life. Isn't it magnificent? Alex nodded eagerly, concealing his real reaction. Those things you created are monsters, not unicorns. After that, there was no going back, Natasha said. I learned that just a tiny piece of the coffin, like the one in my hand here, could be boiled down to its essence and turned into an entire vat of oil that lasted for months. All I had to do was breathe it in for a few minutes each day, and Aunt Grease's magic could be mine. That's what the blue mist was for, Alex thought. Natasha's daily intake of magic. You were free, Alex said. Why didn't you leave the apartment? Go back to your family. And been what? Natasha snapped. Just a normal girl again? I don't think so. You could have been a good witch, Alex said. You didn't have to hurt any of those kids. That's not my fault, Natasha exclaimed. The apartment brought them to my door. I set the first few free, but I was punished. For a long time, the magic oil didn't work anymore. What choice did I have? You could have stopped, Alex thought. You could have done the right thing. But that would have meant giving up magic, and for Natasha that was no option at all. In some ways, she had never stopped being the apartment's prisoner. Biting back his fear, Alex bent down and peered through the side of the coffin. The red scrim covered its sides like algae on the surface of a fish tank. He could just barely glimpse a figure inside. It had a vaguely human shape, but the dimensions were all off. "What's wrong with her?" Alex asked. "Aunt Grease has been in there a long time," Natasha said. "She's as much a part of the house now as—" There were bound to be certain changes. "It doesn't matter. The important thing is that she stays asleep. And that's where you come in, my friend. The sleeping oil doesn't work as well as it used to. Aunt Grease gets restless. You've seen what happens. The earthquakes," Alex said. "Exactly," Natasha said. "The only thing that can put her back to sleep again is scary stories. They calm her down, like lullabies soothe a baby. Maybe they give her beautiful nightmares." She grinned as an idea struck her. "You should try it, the oil. Once you see what it's like to have magic at your fingertips." She clapped her hands, suddenly as giddy as a child. "I could teach you how to cast spells. Think about it, Alex. Wouldn't being a warlock be a lot better than writing about one?" The strained smile on Natasha's face did little to hide her desperation. Alex felt an inkling of pity. "If I stay," he said, "will you let Yasmin and Lenore go?" "Of course," Natasha said. "No harm will come to them." Alex smiled with relief, as though Natasha had set his mind at rest. He knew she was lying, though. As soon as he told his story, he'd never see his friends again. Without warning, the entire room jerked to the left like a carnival ride. Iron gates squealed against their moorings. Cots flew across their cells. A misshapen clunk off the coffin lid plummeted to the floor and shattered like a glass vase. With a shout of anguish, Natasha fell to her knees and frantically gathered the pieces. "Tell a story," she exclaimed. "Quick!" "I don't have one. Just make it up." "It's not that easy." "Then tell her a true story," Natasha said. "The reason you wanted to destroy your Nightbooks. She'll like that. That's not scary." "It was to you," Natasha said. "Something made you terrified of your own stories, of the kind of person who could have such dreadful ideas. Feed your fear." The magical quake rose in intensity. A crack appeared in the stone wall. The coffin swung back and forth like a vampire's hammock. I love that image. Alex remained silent. "All I have to do is keep my mouth shut," he thought, "and Aunt Grease will eventually wake up." He didn't like the idea of bringing another evil witch into the world, but at least it was an evil witch who probably hated Natasha even more than they did. "Why aren't you starting?" Natasha asked. Alex clenched his lips together and stared back at her with defiance. "Fine," Natasha said, raising her hands into the air. They thrummed with gathering power. "Let me make this easy. You either tell your story right now, or I will turn the girl to dust and make you sweep her up." Alex looked at the coffin. There was no movement. No sign that Aunt Grease was going to wake up in the next minute or two. If he tried to wait it out, Natasha would have plenty of time to hurt his friends. But what if there was a way I could force her to wake up, he wondered, formulating a plan. "Last chance," Natasha said, raising her hand higher. "Okay," Alex said. "I'll do it." He turned towards the coffin. There was no need to speak loudly. Aunt Grease was part of the house. If she could hear him when he read stories in the living room, she could certainly hear him when he was standing 3 feet away. Alex took a big breath. "Whew, just like Scheherazade on the 1001st night," he thought. "I was in math," he said, "when my teacher got a call from the office and said that Mr. Calkins wanted to see me. I went, 'Who's Mr. Calkins?' because I really had no idea, and Greg Jenkins said, 'He's the guy who talks to the crazy kids.' The class thought that was pretty funny. I left quick. It took me a while to find Mr. Calkins' office, and when I finally did, I guess he'd been waiting a while, because he looked pretty annoyed. 'Mosher, right?' he asked, consulting this file on his desk. 'Alexander?' I nodded, even though no one ever calls me Alexander. I sat down, and he closed the door behind us. The walls of the room began to shake a little less, like an audience quieting down before a performance begins. Mr. Calkins asked me a bunch of questions. How's school? How are things at home? Icebreakers. I answered him as best I could, but in my head I was trying to figure out what I'm doing here. I'm not a troublemaker. I'm not flunking out of school. I'm no one. And then Mr. Calkins lifted the file with my name on it, and I saw how thick it was, just stuffed with papers, and he said, 'I've been looking through some of your writing through the years. Your teachers photocopied the more disturbing stories. Did you know that? I didn't know that. I thought my teachers always liked me. With a final shudder, like a train car coming to rest at the station, the rumbling came to a complete stop. Natasha, grinning from ear to ear, circled her hand in a clockwise motion. Keep going. Keep going. Mr. Calkins is a gum chewer, Alex said, back in the office now, reliving every moment. He pops one in his mouth and offers me a piece. I take it, but just hold it in my hand. He asks me if I have bad thoughts, nightmares. Do I play first-person shooters, watch violent movies? Do I imagine the gruesome things I write about happening to real people, my family, kids at school? I shake my head. I tell him that the stories don't mean anything, that they're just make-believe. Mr. Calkins nods and makes a note in my file. He thinks I'm lying. I can tell. He thinks there's something wrong with me. And who am I to argue? He has degrees on his wall. He wears a tie. He's an expert. Alex cleared his parched throat. It felt like it was covered and coated with sand. I decided right there and then to destroy my Nightbooks and never write another scary story again. I was terrified that if I didn't stop, I would end up being a boy that Mr. Calkins already imagined me to be. Natasha's applause echoed through the silent room. Perfect, she exclaimed. The pain in your voice, the fear. Bravo. She's going to sleep like a baby. I'm not done, Alex said. Natasha froze, unsure what to make of this unexpected development. Alex didn't give her a chance to think too long. He jumped right into the next part of his story. Instead of destroying my Nightbooks, he said, I was captured by a witch. She said there was darkness in my heart. I wondered if she was right, especially after what happened with Mr. Calkins. Maybe this was what was meant to be. But I quickly discovered that real darkness isn't fun, like in stories. People die. You can't click the backspace key and bring them back to life again. I hated it. It's not who I am at all. The room started to rumble again. It's working, Alex thought with relief. Until this point, he hadn't been sure if his theory was correct. What are you doing? Natasha asked, a warning tone in her voice. Alex ignored her. And now I realize, so what if I write scary stories? I might hurt someone with nouns and adjectives, but I would never hurt someone for real. In fact, I think I might be kind of brave. I wouldn't go so far as heroic. That would be pushing it. But the next time John calls me a scaredy cat, I'm going to tell him about the time I squashed a dangler beneath my foot or escaped a forest of scary unicorns. He won't believe how tough his little brother was. He'll be proud of me. Inside the coffin, Aunt Grease shifted. If scary stories are the sweet dreams that lull her to sleep, Alex thought, backing towards the other side of the room, then courage, friendship, compassion, those are the nightmares that will wake her up. Alex was just hoping he had enough time to finish the job. Natasha was on to him. She strode across the floor, her hands outstretched in a threatening manner, but the room trembled, a solid 8 on the Richter scale this time around, and the witch fell backwards. A chunk of the ceiling crashed to the floor and obliterated the oil diffuser. Red mist leaked from the hole in the bottom of the coffin. No, Natasha screamed, forgetting about Alex for a moment. She scrambled to the coffin, intent on finding a way to plug the leak. Maybe I wouldn't have been so brave if I was alone, Alex continued, smiling at Yasmin. But I met an extraordinary girl who's smart and loyal and brave, and a cat willing to risk her life for her friends. They gave me courage, and the stories I was so worried about, they saved my life. Why did I want to destroy them? It seems so ridiculous now. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not bad. I'm not weird. I'm just a kid who likes monsters. He checked on Natasha. She had given up trying to chase him. Instead, she was pulling strands of crimson light from several invisible pockets in the air and tying them into a complicated knot. The expression on her face had moved beyond anger into an all-encompassing rage. No matter what happens, Alex said, knowing that he only had seconds to spare, I'm glad I was sent to Mr. Calkins' office that day. I'm grateful for my time in apartment 4E, and if I'd never come here, I would still be the same old Alex Mosher, too scared and embarrassed to be who I am. My story might have started out on a sour note, but it's ending on a happy one. The light between Natasha's hands, a blinding sun now, promised a fate far worse than being turned into porcelain figurine. She raised it above her head. Goodbye, storyteller, she said. With an ear-shattering whoosh, the coffin lid rocketed from its perch and landed on the other side of the room. It shattered into a million pieces. Shards of rock candy stung Alex's face like a hailstorm. Oh my gosh, what a fun image. I want you to be making pictures, mind movies in your brain of this scene because it's so good. He hardly noticed. He was too intent on the center of the room. From inside the coffin, a hand rose into the air. Its fingers were candy canes, ending in chiseled nails that looked very, very sharp. They twisted and cracked, testing their newfound freedom. A second hand, much like the first, gripped the side of the coffin. Aunt Grease pushed herself up. You could tell that she had been human at one point. Her ears and nose were in the expected places, but her face drooped like melted taffy, and her eyes were gold-foiled chocolate coins pressed deeply into malleable flesh. Alex didn't scream. He tried to, but there was suddenly no air left in his lungs. He felt like someone had hit him in the stomach with a baseball bat. What have I done? Aunt Grease fixed her eyes on Natasha. The witch dropped the ball of light in her hands like a child caught with a forbidden treat. It vanished. "You're awake," Natasha said, pasting an unconvincing smile on her face. "At last. I've been trying to undo the terrible curse on you for ages." The thing that used to be Aunt Grease gave no acknowledgement that she had heard or understood the words. She stared at her candy cane fingers in astonishment, as though seeing them for the first time. Her fingers crackled as she opened and closed her hands. "The house used its magic to keep you alive," Natasha said. "There were some unfortunate side effects." Aunt Grease lifted herself out of the coffin and stepped onto the floor, tottering unsteadily before rising to her full height. She was wearing a flowing burgundy dress with lots of ruffles. Her body was grotesquely tall and thin, as though it had been stretched along with her face. "Alex," Yasmin whispered, "the keys are hanging from the wall. Let us out." It was as good a time as any. Both witches were distracted, Aunt Grease trying to figure out how to maneuver her new body, Natasha playing the role of dutiful servant. Good, she said, holding Aunt Grease's elongated fingers as though she were a child learning how to skate. "Just like that. Left, right, left, right." Alex retrieved the keys and opened the cell door as quietly as possible. The children crept towards the exit of the chamber, Lenore just behind them. "Don't worry," Natasha said. "You'll be right as rain in no time at all. You need sustenance, life force to replace all that you've lost." She moved to the side, allowing Aunt Grease a clear view of Alex and Yasmin. "That's why I brought you these two. I know you prefer them cooked, but I think in this case you might make an exception." Aunt Grease, upon seeing the children, shuddered with anticipation. Her gold-foiled eyes jumped between Alex and Yasmin, like a starving diner trying to choose between two equally delicious desserts. She took a single step forward, and then stopped. Aunt Grease pointed a candy cane finger in Natasha's direction. "I remember now," she said in a guttural voice that seemed to claw its way out of her throat. "You're the one that put me to sleep. You're the one who changed me into this thing." For a moment, Natasha looked ready to deny it, to tell any lie in order to save her life. Then her face hardened into a defiant expression. "Yes," she snapped. "It was me. What are you going to do about it? I'm not a weak little girl anymore. I'm a witch." She raised her right hand, and a spear of black ice shot from her palm. Aunt Grease swatted away like a bothersome fly. Natasha snarled with frustration and unleashed a barrage of spells, one after another. Choking mist, nooses made of flame, twin skeletons brandishing iron swords. Alex knew they should run, but he couldn't turn away. It was an awe-inspiring display of magic. Aunt Grease was not impressed. She turned each spell away without any effort. Finally, Natasha raised her hand, and nothing happened at all. She fell to her knees. "Oh dear," Aunt Grease says. "It looks like you've run out of magic." She smiled, revealing peppermint bark fangs and a forked tongue of grated licorice. "Fortunately, I don't have that problem. I'm a real witch, but you're nothing but a little thief." Natasha tried to run. She didn't get far. Aunt Grease leaped across the room and landed on her back. Yasmin and Alex didn't want to see what happened next. They ran. Behind them, they heard a short scream of pain, followed by horrible crunching sounds, and then nothing at all. Chapter 21. Unexpected Magic. They burst out of the house and into the dark forest. Yasmin was a lot faster than Alex, her arms pumping like pistons of a steam engine. Nevertheless, Alex was able to keep up. Every time he fell behind, he just imagined what would happen if Aunt Grease caught him. It was a powerful motivator. "What are we gonna do?" Alex asked between deep gasps of air. "Even if we make it back to the apartment, we're still trapped." "Lenore and I have it covered," Yasmin said. "Save your breath for running." They reached the bottom of the hill. The unicorns paced them on either side, jabbing their horns at the children. Alex tried to stay on the path, but it was hard to do while running. He felt a horn scratch his shoulder, his calf, Yasmin slapped a hand to her side and screamed in pain. Why are the unicorns still here? Alex thought. Natasha said that when a witch dies, all her magic is undone. But then he realized that it hadn't truly been Natasha who created the unicorns. She had stolen magic from Aunt Grace. Behind them, they had heard a voice that echoed magically through the entire forest. "Children," Aunt Grace said, "are you hiding from me? How delightful." Alex ran faster, regretting for the first time his lifelong hatred of exercise. His heart felt like it was going to explode. The air in his lungs thinned to a trickle. He ignored it all. Run. Finally, they reached the door to the apartment. There was no longer any need for the bone keys. The door had been blown from its frame. Charred splinters crushed beneath Alex's shoes. Natasha blasted it off with magic, he thought. Guess she didn't have an extra set of keys after all. The children ran down the hallway and into the living room. Alex's heart fell. The wall that blocked their passage to the outside world seemed more impassable than ever. "Okay, Lenore," Yasmin said, "do your thing." "What thing?" Alex asked. The beating of his heart sounded like a metronome turned to its highest setting. So you know when you play piano or music, they have that... That's a metronome, so his heart's beating really fast. He leaned on a table, afraid that he was going to collapse, and saw his nightbook sitting there. An idea stirred. If only we can get out of here. Lenore got a full dose of the sleeping oil, Yasmin said, but that wasn't all. She breathed in the mist, and that gave Natasha her magic too, so I figure she's got a few spells on her. She's a cat. Lenore puffed out her chest. Exactly. She raised a single paw into the air and closed her eyes in concentration. Nothing happened. "Give her a chance," Yasmin said with a nervous smile. "We tried it out in the cell. She made a spoon float in the air." This is a little different, Alex thought, but he didn't want to be discouraging. He looked down the hallway and into the forest. It remained empty. For now. "You almost had it," Yasmin exclaimed with encouragement. "I definitely saw something flicker there for a moment. Keep trying, Lenore." She turned to Alex. "Any sign of Aunt Grace?" "Not yet," he said, glancing in her direction. Lenore was floating slightly off the ground, both paws raised now. "I'll let you know the moment." Aunt Grace appeared in the doorway. "I recognize that voice," she said, entering the apartment. "The storyteller. I owe you my gratitude for the pleasant dreams you've given me these past few weeks. So you won't eat me?" "On the contrary," Aunt Grace said. "It just makes me more curious about what you might taste like." She took a large bite of her index finger and crushed it between her teeth, and it instantly grew back. "Alex!" Yasmin screamed. The front door had not only appeared, it was open. Beyond it, Alex could see the fourth-floor hallway, drab and ugly and fantastically real. He grabbed his nightbook and ran, gritting his teeth as he leapt across the threshold, certain that some kind of magic would hold him back. Then he heard the muffled sound of the frayed hallway rug beneath his sneakers and knew he was free. He grinned at Yasmin, who was running right beside him. "We're out of the apartment," he thought triumphantly. "For real this time." It didn't mean he was safe, though. Alex glanced over his shoulder to see if Natasha was following them, and saw Lenore had stopped outside the apartment door. She raised her paws in the air, casting another spell. What was she doing, Alex wondered. And then he saw Aunt Grace try to leap into the hallway and crash into an invisible barrier instead. She hissed in frustration and glared down at Lenore. "I see Natasha is not the only one who's been stealing my magic," the witch said. "I'm disappointed, Lenore. After all those centuries we spent together, I expected more loyalty from you." That's why Natasha never liked Lenore, Alex thought, still moving towards the elevator at the end of the hallway. She wasn't even her cat. Lenore looked up at Aunt Grace and meowed pleadingly. "You've grown soft in your old age, my friend," Aunt Grace said. "I'm afraid the children really do have to die, and then I'll come back and deal with you." The witch ran a single nail along the invisible barrier. A long scratch began to appear. Lenore turned to Alex. Her use of magic had taken its toll. She looked as if she was about to collapse from exhaustion. "That's all I can do," she seemed to say. "I'm sorry." She vanished. The children ran to the elevator at the end of the hall. Yasmin punched the panel. For once, the doors opened right away. Alex hurried inside and pressed the B button, while Yasmin repeatedly jabbed the button to close the doors. Finally, they slid shut. The elevator's gears squeaked to life, and they started to descend. "You have a plan?" Yasmin asked. Alex raised the nightbook in his hands. "Not exactly," he said. "More of an idea. First thing we have to do is get to the basement. After that..." The lights went off, plunging them into darkness. Footsteps skittered across the roof of the elevator. "She's here," Yasmin whispered. Alex nodded, afraid to move. The elevator rocked back and forth like a ship at sea. Above them, the witch stomped her feet and giggled. The car fell. Alex loved thrill rides as much as the next 12-year-old, but this wasn't like Free Fall or Tower of Terror. This was horrifying. The children screamed as they plummeted to earth, the car banging against the walls of the shaft like a runaway train. Alex closed his eyes and waited for the inevitable crash. They jerked to a sudden halt. Yasmin and Alex fell together in a tangle of arms and legs. They quickly got to their feet, bruised, but okay. The elevator doors opened. Yasmin peeked out. "It's the basement, just like you wanted," she said. "Yay?" They stepped into the concrete floor of the elevator. Doors instantly closed behind them. Alex heard a sizzling sound and saw the handle of the stairway melt away. No way to escape, he thought. Aunt Grease cackled. It seemed everywhere at once. "Come on," Alex whispered. They wove between towering stacks of boxes into an open area where larger items were stored. A rotted crib overflowing with doll parts, moldy sofas with springs busting through the cushions, and an old pinball machine with a cracked display. Alex could hear the rush of flames as Old Smoky, the ancient boiler, worked hard to keep its charges nice and toasty. He walked faster. "Okay," Yasmin said. "What's this plan of yours?" "We're doing it." "Walking?" "No," he whispered. "We're leading the witch towards the—" Yasmin screamed as she flew backwards. Alex spun around, and he saw his friend in Aunt Grease's outstretched hands. The witch leaned forward and opened her jaws, far wider than should have been possible. She seemed determined to fit Yasmin's entire head in her mouth. Alex opened his nightbook. Jason couldn't decide which was stranger, he read. The fact that his sister died every Tuesday at 11:15, or that she always came back to life 22 minutes later. Aunt Grease shook her head like a student caught not paying attention in class. "What was that?" she asked. "What did you say?" Alex read the next line. Zachary didn't think his day could get any worse until he looked out his car window and saw the monsters. This time Alex had truly caught the witch's attention. She really does love scary stories, he thought. Perhaps the sentences would have less power if she had heard them already, but these were from failed stories that he had never finished or simply threw away. He had liked their openings, however, and written them down on a single page. Alex remembered something Mrs. Coral had once told them. Every sentence is a learning experience. No writing is ever wasted. He hoped he had a chance to tell her how right she was. The gleaming city was a marvel of the modern world, all silver and chrome and glass, except for the ancient hole at its center. Alex started to walk backwards. Aunt Grease followed him, as though in a trance, releasing Yasmin without even realizing it. Alex glanced over his shoulder, making sure that he wasn't going to trip over anything. Right now he was casting a spell of his own, and the slightest interruption might break its magic. As Miss Levine wrote the math problem, a sentence scrawled itself onto the blackboard just above his head. I was the only one who could see it. Alex could feel Old Smoky's heat on his back. Almost there, he thought. Addie had always thought that clowns were the scariest part of the circus, he read. She was wrong. "Give me the book," Aunt Grease said. She held out her candy cane fingers, a hungry, desperate look in her eyes. "I need it." Keeping one eye on the witch, Alex cautiously opened the heavy iron door to Old Smoky. It was even larger than him. Inside the boiler, flames roared. "What are you doing?" Aunt Grease asked, crossing half the space between them in a heartbeat. Alex read from his nightbook, freezing the witch in her tracks. "When I woke up that morning, there was a package wrapped in brown paper waiting on my front porch. My address had been written in clear, crisp handwriting. 42 Skybird Lane, Pennington, Pennsylvania. That wasn't the strange part. The strange part was the name written above the address, which wasn't a name at all. It read, 'To the man standing right behind you.' I turned around. Aunt Grease grinned with childlike pleasure. "What happens next?" she asked. "I have to know." "Good," said Alex. He threw the nightbooks into the flames. The witch screamed in horror and leapt across the floor, knocking Alex out of the way as she stuck her hands into the raging heat. "No!" she wailed, clawing desperately for the nightbook. "What have you done? The stories! The stories!" Yasmin shoved her from behind. Aunt Grease fell forward into the flames. Alex slammed the boiler door shut, and the two children held their backs against as the witch struggled to escape. Finally there was a sound like rice pouring into a bowl, and the witch stopped struggling. The smell of burned candy apples filled the air. Alex peeked through the tiny slot in the door. There was nothing left of Aunt Grease but a large mound of sugar and 4 candy cane fingers. They were still wrapped around the remains of the nightbooks. Oh my gosh, what an ending. Woo! All right. Chapter 22, The Gift. It had been unusually hot all May, and that Saturday was no exception. By the time Yasmin finally arrived at the park, Alex's favorite Cthulhu t-shirt was stuck to his back. "Sorry I'm late," Yasmin said, taking a seat next to him on the bench. She was holding a small paper bag in her hands. "I had to finish something up." After a few months of home-cooked meals, the color had finally returned to Yasmin's skin. When she smiled, her cheeks looked healthy and full. "It's okay," Alex said. "I was just sitting here pondering." "New story?" "No," he said. "I mean, yes, I'm working on something. A novel, actually. But mostly I was thinking how weird it was. My brother yelled at me this morning for something so stupid, it's not even worth getting into. And I'm ecstatic about it. For months my family has been walking around on eggshells, being so nice to me. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Now I feel like things are finally returning to normal." "You know what I mean?" "I know what you mean," Yasmin said. "The other day my mom tore into me for texting Claire when I was supposed to be doing my homework, and I could have hugged her." Yasmin and Alex were at the center of a mystery that had captivated the entire world. 58 confused children, including Yasmin's friend, Claire, Eli, and little Juan, had been found wandering the halls of Bayside Apartments. They recalled their names and everything about their lives up until the moment they entered apartment 4E, but nothing past that. Even more extraordinarily, some of the children had been missing for over a decade more and hadn't seemed to age in the intervening years. There was a lot of talk of aliens and government conspiracies, but for the families who had finally been reunited after years of grief, there was only one explanation: a miracle. Yasmin and Alex could have shed a considerable amount of light on the subject. They might have told authorities how the missing children hadn't aged because they had been frozen as figurines. They could have also explained how the death of the witch who owned the apartment broke the curse and brought the children back to life. Unfortunately, Yasmin and Alex didn't think anyone would believe them, especially since the apartment had reverted back to a completely non-magical form, and so they had pretended to lose their memories along with everyone else. It was easier that way. "I made you something," Yasmin said, handing Alex the paper bag in her hands. "Hope you like it." "Thanks," Alex said, touched. He felt bad that he didn't have anything to give her in return, but he knew that would change soon. He had been saving up for tickets for a Mets game. Inside, the bag was a simple composition book. Yasmin had covered it with pictures of everything Alex loved: monsters and aliens, creepy clowns and killer dolls, spooky old houses and abandoned amusement parks. The only thing missing was witches, and Alex was okay with that. "It's sad you lost all your Nightbooks," Yasmin said. "I figured you could write some new stories in this one." "It's perfect," Alex said, his face glowing warm. "It's the nicest gift anyone ever gave me." "Don't get all mushy," Yasmin said, getting to her feet. "Besides, I didn't come here just for you." "Where is she?" Alex nodded towards a large elm tree. "Over there in the shade," he said. "I guess after all those years indoors, she still haven't gotten used to the sun." Lenore was lying in a comfortable spot on the base of the tree. Yasmin and Alex took turns caring for her, though they suspected she was the happiest when the three of them were together. The orange cat glanced in their direction now. "I'm glad to see you, but not quite glad enough to walk all the way over there." Yasmin checked her watch and gasped in surprise. "I gotta run," she said. "My parents freak out if I'm like a minute late." "Do you really like your present?" "I love it." "Don't just love it," she said. "Use it." After Yasmin and Lenore left, Alex headed home, flipping through his new nightbook. The empty pages brimmed with possibility. What if? Alex broke into a run. He had an idea for a new story, and he couldn't wait to get home and start writing. That is the end of the book. I love this book so much. I hope you loved it too. Definitely, if you can, at some point get a chance or get a copy of this book yourself, because there's just something magical about reading it yourself. I hope you enjoyed it. I strongly encourage you to read every book J.A. White writes, because he's phenomenal. But I'm going to go have some dinner now, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. Bye-bye.